So we've all had an opportunity to reflect on the presidential debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And I find that one of the most interesting comments made was when Donald Trump suggested that the Haitian migrants are eating the pets. Somebody type pets in the chat room. Somebody type eating the pets in the chat room. And we laugh at it as humorous, but it says a lot. You know, here's what I want you to understand. Um, Haitians, of course, are black. They're clearly of African descent, but they are not what we would consider foundational black Americans. They are not the people who were here, who can trace their heritage to the plantations in North America before 1860. They have a different heritage, they have a different culture, just like so many other Africans from the diaspora who are not African American, who are not foundational black American. And so because of that, there's a different culture. And amongst ourselves, we know that, we acknowledge that. But I would say that up until very recently, foundational black Americans never actively attempted to draw a distinction between themselves and the other members of the African diaspora. In fact, we welcomed them here. We saw them as our brothers, we saw them as our sisters, and of course many of us still do. A rift has arisen, and it has arisen because you have many people who come to this country from overseas who are of African descent, and they make disparaging remarks about black people, black Americans. And so because of that, many African Americans have taken umbrage to that. And it's not because we hate our black brothers and sisters. It's just the fact that the disrespect that many seem to exhibit towards foundational black Americans. Now, the truth is, and shout out to all the pets, Buddy heard about the Haitians eating cats. He's ready to get up out of here. It makes him uncomfortable to think about these Haitians. Everybody say, shout out to Buddy. Buddy, you good, buddy. I got you, buddy. Calm down, baby. You gonna be all right. Don't worry about it. We're not gonna let them get you, baby. All right. So Buddy is concerned. Buddy wants to voice his opposition to opening the border, allowing it to stay open. But all just aside, it's an accusation that has a lot more meaning and culture. For instance, in a debate or in a discussion, in her appearance on Fox News, she pointed out that Joy Reid is not a foundational black American. Joy Reid, in fact, is a first-generation African immigrant whose parents are from the west coast of Africa. Now, personally, I love having our African brothers coming here. I love having our African sisters coming here. I respect the culture. I appreciate the culture. Same thing goes for our Caribbean brothers and sisters. The more the merrier. I think that the problem is when you have those coming from those cultures and then they begin to castigate black American culture. In fact, many of them will say, we don't have a culture. And I find that intriguing, considering that it's the culture that has allowed us to survive. When you look up the definition of what a culture is the practices, habits, heritage, and it's all encompassing: the language, the food, the things that help perpetuate a group of people and their offspring into the future. And when you examine African American culture or foundational black American culture, you have to look at the conditions that we have been presented here in the United States. The United States is a very violent country. And in order to survive in this country, you have to be willing to protect yourself. There was a time, I believe before 1919 and 1865, when there were literally thousands and thousands of black towns around the United States that were founded by black people, fresh out of slavery. And many of those towns were destroyed in what was called Red Summer. And I believe Red Summer happened 1919, 1920, 1921, I'm not sure the exact date. But white Americans literally went around to these different black towns and fired them, razed them to the ground, burned them, looted them. Not because these people were, these black Americans or foundational black Americans were doing anything wrong, but it was purely out of jealousy. When you look at the way anti-black racism works, typically it's the prominent black Americans who have drive and ambition. Those are typically the ones that are targeted for lynching. When you look at those lynching pictures, it wasn't just men who committed crimes or women who committed crimes. It was men who were prominent business owners and business competitors who were then targeted by the judicial system at the time. Allegations were made that they committed some sort of crime, and then they were tried and sentenced and executed. So even at that time, the judicial system was used by the dominant society to get rid of people who were deemed competition or unworthy or who were in the way of some greater goal. And we see the same thing happening with Donald Trump. They're using the local and federal judicial system against Donald Trump to hopefully stifle him and eliminate him from the presidential run. Now, thus far, it has had negligible effect other than to bolster his popularity. But my point is that we see it being used now against this billionaire white man. So, of course, if we look back 100 years, you can see how it could be used against black American grocery store owners, black American business owners, landowners, livestock, lumberyard, all of these things we had. And so because of that culture, or because of that condition being targeted, the anti-black rhetoric that was out and about, the violence perpetrated against black people, we had to develop a violent aspect of our culture. What do I mean? It means that we are known to be willing to purport violence against others. It is part of our reputation, but it grew out of necessity because the culture that we lived in, the greater culture in the United States, is itself violent. And unless you're willing to use violence to protect yourself, i.e. in the form of riots, lashing out, i.e. in the form of just generally having a violent environment, then people will run in and just destroy your community. It's happened before. And so over the generations, and even before the end of slavery, when you look at the Indian problem, when you look at the Florida problem, when you look at the situation where even before the Civil War started, Abraham Lincoln and the presidents that came before him were faced with the fact that many escaped slaves had run down to Florida. They had run into Florida, they were held up down there, they had hooked up with the Seminole Indians, and they were on a regular basis conducting raids across the border to Georgia and all the way into South Carolina, and to free other slaves, to get supplies, to pillage, to burn. And then they would go back to Florida, to the swamps of Florida. And it got so bad that, Georgia said, well, we're just going to be an all-white state. We don't even want blacks here because they're just trouble. Now, the thing is, we've always been willing, even from the first slave ship that was brought to this country, it was absolutely necessary for them to understand that we were willing to fight for our freedom. And we were also willing to fight for our families and our children and our things and what we built. And in doing so, we forced America to see just how savage it had become, willing to destroy men and women and children merely because they were competition. So underlying that is racism. Now, what does that mean in the context of having all of these folks now being called out as being separate from foundational Black American? As I've said on many of my conversations with you all before, and shout out to everybody in the chat room. I know this plane is going to land and, at some point, but I got to give you some historical context so you can understand. So bear with me. Somebody type bear with me in the chat room. Somebody type bear with me in the chat room. So bear with me, because you have to understand the historical context for how this particular culture that we have arose, why this aspect of Black culture, the violence, the willingness to purport violence, the edginess, the hypersensitivity to racism and bigotry and prejudice. The Black American, the typical foundational Black American can sniff out racism from across the room. We can read a situation and tell you not only what kind of racism it is, where it happened, where it came from, because before you're the age of 10, you have a master's degree in racism, and by the time you get to be a 30, 40-year-old middle-aged person, you have a PhD, 2 or 3 of them in racism and all the different types thereof. And so we recognize, we see it when it's coming. And so, yeah, there's a hypersensitivity to it because we know what happens after the racism. The racism happens, then there's the targeting, and then you get destroyed. And so we're hypersensitive to it. Everything is racism, and it has to be. Even if there's an element of racism, it's like it pollutes the whole entity or the whole institution if there's an element of racism. And so we want to root it out at its core, because we recognize that racism unchecked is like cancer, and it'll spread throughout an entire institution, whether it be the housing market, whether it be education, whether it be finance. We've dealt with that. Our ancestors have had to fight against that. So culturally speaking, there is an anti-racist vein that runs through Black American culture, and it's necessary. There's also a propensity to do violence ingrained in foundational Black American culture, because it was absolutely necessary for our survival. White people, white Americans, know this about us. They know this about Black Americans. They know that within our culture is an embedded certain triggers, certain responses. So most immigrant Blacks came here after the 1980s, so they're relatively new. They are not inundated in the culture. They got here when things start getting better, as far as all the institutional racism had been outlawed: housing discrimination, job employment discrimination, voter rights discrimination, discrimination as related to education and what universities you could enter. All those battles have been fought. So they got here and they were able to participate in the bounty of what African Americans had fought for. And so their perception of what America is and its racial dynamic is very different than those of us who were raised by foundational Black Americans and who have been taught to see what we need to see for survival. For the most part, most immigrants, if you look at them, they look just like any other foundational Black American. We know the difference between them. They know the difference between each other. Outsiders, whether they be Hispanic, white, Asian, when they see Black people, they just see Black people. They don't distinguish between a Haitian and a African from the continent or a foundational Black American. They just see us all as Black. But now what's happened is, well, let me say it like this. Many of our diasporic brothers and sisters have distinguished themselves from Black Americans. And in doing so, not only do they take credit for the things that they accomplish, but they also put down foundational Black Americans for the culture that we have and for some of the issues that we still deal with. And in doing so, they distinguish themselves. So what's happened in response over the past, I guess, 10 years or so, foundational Black Americans have begun to distinguish ourselves from them. At first, it was a one-way street. In fact, if you go to many of these countries, they'll tell you, and look, shout out to all the brothers and sisters from the continent, all the brothers and sisters from South America, Central America. I love you. I want you here. I'm just trying to explain to you what's happening in the context of white supremacy, racism, and how it really works. They are now able to use this to accomplish the things that they love to accomplish: divide and conquer, and perpetuate anti-Black racism. They know they can't mess with foundational Black Americans because they'll get a response. But now the foundational Black Americans have begun to push out and distinguish themselves from the Haitians, the Africans, and the others from the different diaspora groups. Now they're vulnerable. When I say they, I'm talking about non-foundational Black Americans. You are now vulnerable. You are now vulnerable to the attacks. That's why Donald Trump can get on the internet and say these Haitian, he didn't say Black, these Black people from, he specifically called out a country. These Haitians are eating the pets in Ohio, right? Ann Coulter said, Joy Reid is an African immigrant. She has no heritage to the United States. He is basically, and look, whether you like Trump or not, clearly he has benefited from being a member of the dominant society. Clearly, Ann Coulter has benefited from being a member of the dominant society. Clearly, these two folks understand innately what bigotry, prejudice, and racism is. Clearly, they understand that. Clearly, they understand how it works. Clearly, they understand culturally that it's always good to keep your adversaries or those who are vying for power separate. So whether you like them or not, whether you vote for them or not, let's just recognize it for what it is. They are exercising and perpetuating division amongst folks in the Black community. And it all started because we had a lot of our Black American brothers and a lot of our non-Black American brothers and sisters on both sides create division because of animosity, because of cultural differences, name calling. And so now you have the dominant society capitalizing on that division. Again, they get a chance to divide and conquer and practice anti-Black racism by saying these Haitians out here eating these cats. That's terrible. Somebody say, protect the cats. Somebody say, where's Buddy? Where's Buddy? Come here, Buddy. Come on back over here. You want to talk? You say, protect the cats. You know, in suggesting that Haitians are eating cats, you're suggesting that they're uncivilized. You're suggesting that they're savages, they're uncultured, that they are poor and impoverished, low think. This is what the suggestion is. And these are the same stereotypes that are often perpetuated against Black Americans and all other Black folks here in the United States at any given time. But the reason that you don't have Black Americans running to the defense of these Haitians is because, you know, for so many decades now, there's been animosity, not just between Haitians and foundational Black Americans, but basically they said, we're better than you, Black Americans, you know, and we don't want to be part of your group. We got it. And so now foundational Black Americans say, okay, well, you got it. Let's see how you do. Let's see how you do under the full weight of the dominant society to exercise of white supremacy racism in this country. And what you're going to start seeing is, you know, and it's happening immediately. That Haitian flag is associated with savagery. It's associated with, as Donald Trump said, a shithole country. It's associated with eating pets. And here's the cold part about it. The liberals immediately jumped in and denied it. And the reason is because if they have to choose between Haitian immigrants and pets, considering that they value the lives of pets more than human beings, but they also value the lives of immigrants. They have to choose between their two main constituencies, so to speak. You see? So they just said, no, that's not happening. Even if it is, I don't know. Okay? I've heard some reports saying there's nothing to it. I have no idea. We'll just have to see how this plays out. But the fact of the matter is, you're going to have people capitalizing this, those who consider themselves, members of the dominant society, white supremacists, and there's going to be black people capitalizing on it too, because you have people who are of African descent who have animosity towards foreigners, generally speaking, and they have animosity towards people of African descent who are foreigners, generally. And there's some who specifically harbor anti-black immigrant sentiments. And so they're going to capitalize in it. But what it's doing is, again, Haitians and Africans and people you purposely separated yourself from the cover provided by foundational Black Americans, as opposed to saying, you know what, let me just get in this group and be quiet and just be a Black American. Let me just play the role. You purposely began to distinguish yourself from this particular group. In a country where we are already outnumbered, you further divided yourself. There's only, comparatively speaking, and there's 400 million, more or less 400 million Americans, 400 million people living in the United States. Haitians probably compose a few million, and you've purposely separated yourself from the cover of the 40 million Black Americans that are here. So now you're your own separate group. You basically just separated yourself from the herd, and you're setting yourself up for the kill. And you did it yourself. The minute you begin to distinguish yourself as non-foundational Black American, you lose the cover that foundational Black Americans provide. There are some other ways you can do that. There's some other ways you can lose the privilege and the cover provided by the threat that Black Americans provide, which keeps those who would try to destroy us away. Because it's a threat that comes along with messing with foundational Black Americans. Back in the day, you say something, Jesse Jackson was showing up. You say something, Al Sharpton was showing up. Now you say something crazy, Ben Crump is showing up. There's going to be a voice. There's going to be something you said. People might show up at your house. We stand up for each other. That's part of the culture. Yeah, we get it. There's a lot of people in Chicago and other cities getting shot. We get that. That's an internal problem. But what's not going to happen is we're not going to let outsiders destroy us without there being a fight. And yeah, again, I'm going to say it again. There's a huge problem with Black on Black crime. I get that. But that's on us, and that's something we need to work out. You don't have Black on Black crime when people leave the ghetto and get out of poverty. That's a hood problem for the most part. The problem is, even if you're not hood, even if you're economically well off, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a football player, you can still get snatched up out of your car. So that's not an economic problem, that's a racist problem. So that means anybody is subject to that. Anybody can get handled like that. And so that makes it a bigger problem, because it means you can never escape the condition associated with losing your life just for the color of your skin. As a Black man living in the hood, all you got to do is get out of that violent inner city hood and you'll be okay. But if you're a Black man and you're being targeted by racist cops, it doesn't matter how much money you have. They're targeting you because of the color of your skin. So there's no escape from that. That's why there's such a aggressive response to that sort of racism and bigotry by foundational Black Americans, because we dealt with it before. We know what it leads to. And so we respond accordingly. But again, for you brothers and sisters who are part of the diaspora, you've purposely separated yourself from the protections provided by foundational Black Americans. And what they know will happen if they begin to target us like they once did. We're going to make a lot of noise. We're going to make a stink about it. Might end up being a riot. The rest of the world is going to look at America like you're hypocrites. So America loses standing in the world. The civil rights movement darn near destroyed America. We went from the land of the free, those who helped liberate Europe, to being Hitler-esque in its oppression of black people. Here you are in the 1940s, 1945, you come back and you're liberating Europe from the tyranny of Nazi Germany. But then in your own communities, it's 1950, 1955, you are unaliving people because of the color of their skin. You're still lynching people. So that makes you look like a hypocrite. This is a 10-year separation. So think about it. From 2014, you're heroes. By 2024, you're the tyrants of the earth. How did that happen? So again, it destroyed the civil rights movement, forced the rest of the world to see just how racist, openly racist and segregated America was. And we weren't backing down. We literally held a mirror up for America to see itself and its tyranny and its bigotry. You had these folks who were dressed in suits, children being accosted by police dogs, uniformed police who stand for law and order, representatives of the state using police dogs to attack folks walking around in their Sunday best, just walking down the street in unison singing old Negro spirituals. It made America look like a horrible place to be. And so because of that, and especially considering that black Americans in general have the moral high ground because of how we were brought to this country, we're the only group of people that did not ask to come to this country. We were brought here against our will, unwillingly, sold by our own African brothers, transported throughout the Caribbean and brought to the United States and forced here to work generation after generation in permanent servitude. And slavery was not this clean business where you wake up at 5 o'clock, you pick cotton all day, you eat 3 meals a day and go back to sleep. No. There was lots of sexual assault involved, both on males and females. There was a lot of degradation. There was a lot of mutilation. There was a lot of forced pregnancies. There was a lot of abuse. In some respects, foundational black Americans and our ancestors are subject to some of the most inhumane abuse ever experienced by any group of people on this planet. So slavery wasn't this clean, it's just business sort of deal. And so because of that, black Americans or foundational black Americans have every right to be angry with this country, especially considering that many of our people are still suffering from the consequences of that condition. That's why you have black people who still speak Ebonics. They still chop their words because they learned it from the people who are direct descendants from those plantations, who are direct descendants from that sharecropping institution. I mean, Jim Crow just ended. And then the prison industrial complex and the so-called war on drugs kicked up. And we're still dealing with the remnants of that. So there's been an ongoing chain of events and systematic structures and laws and social systems set up to keep black folks in a certain position. And that's why the culture is still necessary. So now you have all these immigrants who come in and they think, oh, everything's fine. America's a land of prosperity. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to tell everybody I'm Haitian. As a matter of fact, I'm going to put down those black Americans because they don't know what they're talking about. And now you're getting targeted. Because what you failed to realize, it is that threat that foundational black Americans as a whole present that keeps the dominant society at bay. And now you've purposely taken yourself outside of the protective covering of that foundational black American blockade. And now you're going to be targeted. So we'll see how long this roller coaster ride is for the Haitians and the Africans. And again, I love you. I love my brothers and sisters. I have so many good friends who are from the continent, and never having visited Africa, I have so much love and respect for you. I love you, and I think any of us, and the thing is, other thing I'll say, once you get to a certain level of success, you're just happy to see another black person who is successful, whether they be from the Congo or Compton, whether they're from, Haiti or Houston. But I would like for you all to recognize and understand, and we have brilliant people on both sides, and I would like for people to begin to recognize that many of the pushback that you're receiving from some of the brothers, especially the good brother Tariq Nasheed, who is, by the way, in my opinion, a modern day historian, and of course we know he's a producer of film and movies, but he understands historically what needs to be done, and he's simply calling a lot of the immigrants out for their anti-black rhetoric. And so he's chastising you for being off code. And so I understand what my brother's doing. And if you would begin, instead of fighting against him, hear what the brother is saying. The brother is basically saying, y'all are off code. You are making it more difficult for us, because if the dominant society begins to sense that there's some weakness, or that, we can be pushed around, then we're gonna get set back 100 years. You look at people like some of these, I forget what's his name, Top G. Somebody type Top G in the chat room. His name, Tate, the Tate brothers, Andrew Tate and his brother. Over the past month or 2 or 3 months, I've been noticing there's been a lot more anti-foundational Black American rhetoric coming out of his mouth. And I'm like, sir, you have enough problems in Romania, and you're all the way over there. What issue do you have with foundational Black Americans? It's my understanding that his father was a foundational Black American, but the fact that he married a white woman should let you know his father's perception and perspective on foundational Black Americans. Let's just keep it 100. He married a white woman, had some children with that woman, and that lets you know a lot about who he is and what he probably instilled in his sons, whose mother is white and ended up living in London. And at some point he made his way to some other European cities, and now he's in Romania. But some of the anti-foundational Black American rhetoric, why, you're 1,000, 2,000 miles away. What business do you even have? Why do you even care? Why don't you focus on the issues that are going over? Why don't you tell those Africans that you're around, or those Caribbeans that you're around in those European countries, what they need to do and not do? Why shoot shots of anti-Black racism over here? But nevertheless, what's happening is, when you do that, you lose the protection of foundational Black Americans. See, as a foundational Black American, I can pretty much go anywhere on this planet and know that as long as I stay 100% down with my people, that my people will always have my back. As long as my people see that I recognize myself as a foundational Black American, I'm gonna get the head nod. What's up, bro? It's an unspoken word. It's an unspoken code. No matter where we are, whether I'm hanging out with my friends in Colombia, whether I'm hanging out in many of the Caribbean islands, whether I'm in Europe, as a foundational Black American, we have an understanding that for the most part, if push comes to shove, when it comes to these racial issues, we have our backs. We have each other's backs. But when you begin to talk about foundational Black Americans, even if you are a foundational Black American, then you are not going to receive the protection that comes from the culture that you all say doesn't exist. The same thing that you're taught, yes, it's the same ghetto, ratchet, violent culture that you ostracize, which in major parts allows us to be safe. Now, do I like it? Is there better ways to do it? Yes. But it's that the threat of violence, it's that obnoxiousness about foundational Black American, the fact that it's going to be a fight and nobody's going to allow you to victimize them, and that we're all going to come together, whether or not you messing with the ratchet one in our group or the business person in our group, is the upstanding Christian person. We're still going to make sure that the situation is addressed. We're still going to make sure that you're not just going to get away with perpetrating anti-Black racism on one of our own. But what happens when you separate yourself from that group? So the biracials who say, oh, no, I'm not Black, you on your own. And you're going to suffer the consequences of that. Those of our brothers and sisters who are from the diaspora, who are purposely distinguishing themselves from the Black American culture and talking bad about Black American culture, you're not going to have the protection of the foundational Black American culture. You're not part of the culture anymore, and the culture provides security. And that's pretty much what you see happening. And so, again, I'm going to reemphasize this point. And shout out to everybody in the chat room. I hope you all appreciate this. I know it's a little long-winded, but it's important. I can't just do this and not lay the proper context. That's why I had to lay out the historical. We've been doing this. This is how we've survived in this country for over 400 years. It's the same culture. It's changed, it's morphed, it's different. But we, for the most part, stick together on issues of race because we know at the end of the day, the dominant society will try to eliminate us if we are not hypersensitive about race. And I don't care what your favorite podcaster says, all you different conservatives, you know, you Black conservatives on the internet, that's a political party, man. You know, that's a political affiliation. Everybody's conservative to a certain point, you know. But if you don't understand what's really going on, then you're undermining your people and you're undermining your own existence. And so this is what's happening right now. And so when you see Ann Coulter and people like Donald Trump drawing distinctive lines between what is foundational Black American and what is not, that's their season and opportunity to divide and conquer, peel off some of these, ostracize some of these black folks. I mean, the American pastime is picking on Black people. You said pick, so why was okay? So you said they not part of y'all? Oh, you mean those Haitians are? Well, we gonna say they eat cats. Yeah, all right. Oh, Joy Reid, she's not a foundational Black, so she doesn't get the cover from foundational Black. Oh, well, we're gonna say she's a African booty scratcher from Africa. We're gonna insult her because at the end of the day, there's still. The dominant society is still perpetuating these same negative stereotypes about Black folks. And if they can get away with doing it and not suffer a penalty, they're going to do it. It's a national pastime. So my suggestion to you brothers and sisters who are from the continent and from the Caribbean, you need to fall in. You need to be intelligent enough to recognize that the reason that foundational Black Americans are still here in the United States, and the reason that you're still here, and the reason that you're able to be here is because of the foundational Black American culture that you say doesn't exist, which is actually the reason that keeps us safe. That same violent, easily aggravated, hypersensitive to prejudice, bigotry, and race culture is the reason why we're still here. There was never any intent for there to be descendants of slaves in this country. They were going to work us to death and get rid of us. Up until 1808, the population here in the United States of folks who were descended from slaves was 400,000. 400,000. The vast majority of them were men. They brought men to this country to perform labor, to help cut the trees, perform the task. It was too difficult. And so they went to Africa, they bought slaves that were already being sold from the different chieftains. They put them on ships, they brought them over here to the United States by way of the Caribbean and other places. And here we are. Here we are. And that culture is developed. And that culture is the reason that we're still here. By 1860, there were 4 million. And the reason was they started bringing African women and start breeding them over that 50 years because the ban on slavery had went into place in 1808. So they had to breed the slaves because there was more territories. They needed the labor. They stopped importing Africans from Africa and just kept it in-house in the breeding farms in Maryland, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. And that's why we went from 400,000, mostly male black population, which never was supposed to be here, but necessity required that we needed more slaves. So by 1860, right before the Civil War, there were 4 million. But before that, there was never any intention to have any slaves in this, African slaves in this country. This was always meant to be a white man's country. And if you listen to some of the rhetoric, you'll see that some people still feel that way. But the bottom line, we're still here against all odds. And what you're doing is separating yourself from the people who have a 400-year track record of successfully staying here. The Indians aren't here. The original Mexicans aren't here. Those people are mestizos. They got wiped out. Native Americans have, for the most part, wiped out. But black Americans are still here, and it's because of our culture. Even the Italians and the Irish, they're here, but they're not called Italian and Irish. They're called white for the most part. Just think about it. Now, they draw some distinctions amongst themselves, but for the most part, they're gone. But black Americans are still here, still a distinct cultural group. And now you folks have decided that you want to, be separate. And now Donald Trump is saying, y'all out here eating cats. You're out here eating cats. They're stealing the pets and eating cats. And now you got the rest of America looking at you like, oh yeah, we'll participate in some anti-black racism like we've always done, but we won't get in any trouble because we won't be talking about those pesky foundational black Americans who understand how this works, who are hypersensitive to racism. Anyway, I look forward to the comments. I think I've given you all enough that you understand the historical context, the social context. I don't ever want to hear anybody say that black American culture doesn't exist. It does exist. It may be different than yours, but culture arises as a means by which a people can help the next generation survive into the future. What you eat, how you speak, where you live, your customs, your traditions, all of that is geared to help the next generation live. Doesn't mean live well. It just means survive on this earth in a hostile environment. So that being the case, it's Uncle D. I appreciate y'all. Shout out to everybody who subscribed. Shout out to everybody who subscribed while this broadcast was playing. And shout out to everybody who contributed to the Super Chat, the Cash App, and the PayPal. I'm out.